Hi everyone, welcome to another video from STEM Tutorials. In today's tutorial, we'll be looking at implementing for loops in Python. So please open your Spyder in the Anaconda program and get ready to follow along. So what is a for loop? A for loop simply allows us to run a snippet of code repeatedly and make our code look more compact. So I'll show you what I mean by this via an example. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a list of different animals at the zoo. So I have defined a list variable zoo, and I've included 4 different strings referring to 4 different animals in our zoo. So if I just run this code here, what you'll see in our variable explorer, if we click here, is that we have a variable now defined as zoo, which is a type list, and contains 4 different strings referring to the 4 different animals in our zoo. So let's say that we wanted to print each of these animals in our zoo so that we see the output in our Python console. So as you know from our last videos, what we would do is we would type print, and we would refer to each of the elements in the variable zoo. So for instance, zoo of 0 refers to monkey, since this is the value 0 in this list. Then we would print zoo of 1 to refer to the elephant. Then we would print zoo of 2 to refer to the lion. Then we'll print zoo of 3 to refer to the zebra. So now if we run this file, see we ran the file down here and we see our printed outputs, monkey, elephant, lion, zebra. As you can tell, this was quite a bit of typing. And so what we can do is we can use a for loop to condense this piece of code. So I'll show you how we do this. First of all, I'll comment this, just so that we keep in mind this here consisted of 4 lines of code, and then I'll type my for loop. So I'll type it first and then we can go through it together. For animal in zoo, print animal. So here we see our example of a for loop. So what we're saying is for, and we can define any variable here that we want. I'm going to say animal. So oftentimes you'll see a variable of I or j. These are often used for loops. Here I'll refer to animal, and this variable refers to each entity in this list. So you type for, you name some variable in zoo, so zoo refers to this list here. Then you always type a colon, and then you hit enter. Python should automatically indent the line for you, and then you type whatever you'd like to have done. Here we're just saying print the value of our iterable variable, but you could also perform a calculation, which we'll show later on. And please keep in mind this piece of code here is being ignored since it's solely a comment. The number value in front means that this piece of code is not going to be interpreted by Python. So if we run this file, we'll see that we have the same output as before. And like you can see, we accomplished this with significantly less code. As you can imagine, if you're running more and more complex scripts, so for instance complex calculations in these for loops that go over multiple lines, it doesn't make sense to type each of these lines separately, since for instance 5 lines of code in a for loop could explode to 20 lines of code if you didn't account for this for loop. So in this first example, we looked at iterating over each entity of this list with this for loop here. In our next example, I'd like to show you when we iterate over each entity of a range. So I'll just type a for loop to start with again, and then we can go through it together. So I'll say for I in range of 1 to 5 in increments of 1. We'll go through that together. Print string of I. So here you see the same format for a for loop. We're typing for, we define our iterable variable here. Here I'm just going to call it I instead of animal like before. So for I in, and rather than having a list predefined, we're going to define a range, which I'll show you what this means in a moment. And we can type print string. So this is just the action that I'd like to have done at the moment. So I'd like Python to print the value of I for each iteration of this for loop. So like I said, let's look at what this range means. We'll use our console to help us understand. So I'm going to type list to convert this range variable to a list and hit enter. So what we see here is that this range essentially refers to a list spanning from a value of 1 to 4 in increments of 1. So if you consider the previous example, in the previous example we had a list referring to our different animals in the zoo. And now we simply have a list referring to different numeric values. So what do these three values here refer to in a range function? The first value represents the starting value of your list. So here we said start counting with a value of 1. The second value refers to what value do I want the list to end at? What value should we stop counting at? So here we specified it as a value of 5. So this is why our list only goes to a value of 4. Since we want to stop counting at 5, 5 is not being considered. The last value refers to your increment size. So here we're saying that we'd like our increment to be a value of 1, which you can see being done in this list. So if we change this to a value of 2, we can increase the range to a value of 10. What you see is that the output again starts with a value of 1. It increases with a value of 2, since our last value, our increment, is specified with a value of 2, and ends with a value of 9. Since, like we said, in our range, we don't want any of the values to go above or include a value of 10. This is really our stopping value. So where we now understand what this range means, so a list of numeric values, like what we see below, we can now run the for loop. And as we expect, our variable I is changing in its value. It's essentially going through each value in this list here. So remember this range 1 to 5 to 1, we see the output here below. So the value of I will first take on a value of 1, and then it will print this value of 1. In this for loop, Python will go back to line 10, and then I will take on a value of 2, since it's the next value in this list, and it will print a value of 2, and it will proceed until it stops at a value of 5. So our last printed value will be a value of 4. So when I run this, you'll see that this is the output. And the last item that I'll show is that you can also complete calculations with your iterable variable, so with the value I. So here we'll just always add a value of 10 to our value of I to calculate our output and print it. So I'll just show you what we're doing. I'll define a value of A and say equals a value of 10. And then I'll define a variable of B and say that B always equals our variable A plus I. And then we'll print our variable B with each iteration. So looking at this piece of code, can you predict what the output is going to be? So if we think it through, nothing has changed with our range. This line of code here still refers to a value of 1 to 4, increasing in increments of 1. And so with each line of code, B is going to take on a value of A, which is 10, plus I. So in the first iteration, B is going to equal 11. Since we're starting with a value of I equals 1, and A equals 10, so 10 plus 1. In the next iteration, B is going to equal 12, because again, the value of A doesn't change, it equals 10, but I increases by a value of 1, equaling 2. So if I run this, we'll see the printed values going from 11 to 14. So this wraps up our brief tutorial on for loops. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. In our next video, we'll look at for loops with a more complex example where we look at how the area of a circle changes with its radius. So feel free to check that out. And finally, if you're enjoying our videos, please hit the subscribe button and visit our website www.stem-tutorials.com. Thanks for watching.